Kia ora everyone. Do we have a quorum okay. We have a quorum, so we will move. Do we have the staff available? 16. Oh, we should wait for Megan.
Oh, yeah,
she's
Megan.
here. So item 15, the consideration of a private plan change request from Beachlands South Limited Partnership. So this is quite different to the making plan changes operative. This is at a different stage, which will be explained by Craig and Celia. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, good afternoon this time. This is a little bit different in terms of the staging, as you introduced. The report is by Chloe Treneth, who you've heard before for Tony's item. And it's back a few stages in the process. This time, Clause 25 determination required in order to make the call on how to proceed with the plan change. So it considers a plan change from Beachlands South Limited to rezone approximately 307 hectares in Beachlands. I think those slides are useful up there. The red line showing the area of the private plan change and Pine Harbour Marina, and also a map coming from the applicants themselves would show relative distances from the subject site to various places. Now, we've also given it's Chloe's report as well, and in speaking to her last night, we sort of came to a position of how best to approach this, given that she's been suffering COVID. So it's a bit of a tandem act required, I think, for this particular one. So Chloe, if you wanted to jump in now, through you, Mr. Chair, it being your report, otherwise I'm happy to carry on.
I'm happy
Sorry, I'm struggling to hear. I've got two. I can hear your voice twice, Craig, so it's hard for me to follow.
Right, okay. Well, I think, why don't I carry on for now as a way forward, unless there's some technical solution?
It's fine in the room, so it might be feedback if you want to go in and out, maybe Chloe potentially. So Craig, we'll just get you to continue. Thank you.
Should you have your speaker off or his as well?
I'll carry on anyway. So the plan changes a potential residential yield of approximately 3,000 dwellings over the live zoned part of the site. It's effectively split. We can go to the next slide, operator, please. The growth not specifically anticipated by the Auckland Plan 2050 in this area, nor is the zone future urban in the full strategy. However, the Auckland Plan does anticipate approximately 6% of growth will occur within rural areas in and around settlements such as Beachlands. So key issues for the private plan change request are quality, compact urban form and alignment with Council's growth strategy, the proposed change in character of Beachlands by a large increase in population should it once fully developed, transport constraints, water and wastewater infrastructure and climate change. The 3,000 dwellings proposed in the live zoned area equates to approximately 12.2% of the anticipated growth in the rural areas across Auckland over the next 20 to 30 years, with additional future growth provided in the proposed future urban zone. So the future population of Beachlands would increase to over 10,000 people, which is equivalent to a number of places, and Waiku's referenced here as one of them. Further consideration of the proposal in terms of whether it achieves quality, compact urban form and a well-functioning urban environment is needed to understand whether the expanded town can function in a largely self-sufficient manner or whether the expanded town is predominantly reliant on the wider Auckland area. So the unitary plan does enable some growth in rural and coastal towns and villages where it maintains or enhances the character of the town and incorporates adequate provision of infrastructure. For this one, the scale and growth will change the character of beachlands as the plan changes a more intensive residential character focused in and around the new centre. If we could go to the next slide, it would be useful. Yes, no, go back. Back. I think that'll do. The plan change is primarily residentially focused and does provide amenities and services for the wider community, including identifying zoning that would enable proposed secondary school, employment opportunities and recreation opportunities. Whilst the existing character will not be maintained, a further merits assessment is required to determine whether the character will be enhanced by the plan change. Transport constraints relate to several existing safety issues along the Whitford-Maraetai Road and limited public transport. Several intersections are proposed to be upgraded by the applicant at the applicant's cost, as well as the applicant providing a contribution towards increasing the capacity of the Pine Harbour ferry service. However, the applicant is not proposing any contribution for the widening of the Whitford-Maraetai Road to 4 lanes or the Whitford bypass, which are designated currently in the unitary plan, but not funded. Transport upgrades proposed may improve some elements of the road network, but potentially further compromise others, and further consideration is required to understand the benefits to the wider community alongside the impacts and what further mitigation may be appropriate. Auckland Transport has raised significant funding issues in relation to the existing Pine Harbour ferry and the upgrades that are required for the widening of the Whitford-Maraetai Road to 4 lanes and the Whitford bypass. And there are some concerns that reliance on the ferry service is resulting in an undercounting of potential traffic movements as a result of the plan change and therefore impacts. There's no existing capacity within the wastewater network at Beachlands and no public water supply. The applicant is proposing to fully fund wastewater and water supply to service the plan change area. They've identified several options for the disposal of wastewater, including to land, to water, and to the Beachlands Maraetai wastewater treatment plant. Water supply is proposed to be provided by groundwater bores and would be treated. Resource consents would be required in due course for the extraction. The applicant has identified options for water and wastewater servicing, and they do not require any public funding. Watercare Services has raised some concerns about the proposal, and this will require further consideration as part of the merits assessment of the plan change. In terms of the climate change, the potential adverse impacts of future development, including the use of additional private vehicles, are proposed to be offset by the applicant, offset by forest sequestration, sustainable building, including energy efficiency and rain tanks with potable water. So while the proposed precinct policies encourage the development of energy efficient buildings, including on-site generation, at this stage there's no rules in the precinct that require it. Additional capacity would support increased ferry usage, but currently most people in Beachlands travel to the east and south by way of private vehicles. At the course level of assessment, it's not possible to determine whether there would be a significant increase in greenhouse gas emissions, but it is anticipated that an ongoing reliance on private vehicles would have an impact on Council's goals to reduce what's become known as VKT, vehicle kilometres travelled, and greenhouse gas emissions. So the decision that's required at this time is whether to accept, adopt or reject the private plan change request in whole or in part, or to treat it as a resource consent application. Consideration of the detailed merits of the change request is not relevant at this stage of the process. While there may be a potential ground for rejection available under clause 25.4 of Schedule 1 of the Resource Management Act, having regard to the relevant case law, it's recommended that Council exercise its discretion and not reject the private plan change request. It is recommended that the private plan change request is accepted for processing under 25.2b of Schedule 1 and publicly notified for submissions on the basis that it's more appropriate to accept the request than to adopt it or treat it as a resource consent. We could go on to the next slides. Well, let's do that. So in terms of just describing the site and elements of the plan change, the plan change package came well supported by a host of reports, lots of reports covering the usual range of technical issues, ecology and archaeology and heritage and transport, stormwater and everything else. In terms of transport linkages, information's been supplied. We've asked for further information through the process. There's been a couple of goes at that, and information's generally been supplied when requested. Part of the requested information was around transport and it being a significant issue in this one. So in terms of the transport linkages for the plan change, everyone's somewhat familiar with the Formosa golf course and where it is. This plan change covers part of that land, or covers that land. Transport linkages traverse through the site up to Jack Lachlan Drive in the north and ultimately connect to the Whitford Maraito Road, obviously, in the south when the fuzz is developed. So limited local road connections to Jack Lachlan Drive at the time of subdivision. There's also the Pine Harbour Ferry Terminal within pretty good walking distance for much of the site, for the northern part of the site, and a little further for the rest of the site. I think they use the term isochromes for the transport engineers, and so part of it's within the sort of 800 metre isochrome and the rest a little further afield. The proposal suggests a shift to active modes, including walking and cycling, providing connections to the Pine Harbour Ferry and an improved bus service or bus services. And internal cycling and pedestrian networks are proposed, including a coastal path walkway, which will also connect to the ferry. Go on, Celia. Wider transport linkages. There's some interesting data. The census data shows that for Beachlands, around 10% of all workers work from home. I don't know if that's growing, but that's what we had at the time. 80% by private vehicle, 6% travel by ferry, and less than 1% use bus to get to work. So travel to and from Beachlands is predominantly by private vehicle along Whitford Maraito Road, which is a rural road with a bit of a poor safety record. Limited local bus service between Maraito and Botany, hourly. Pine Harbour to downtown ferry service, 20-minute peak intervals on that one with a journey of about half an hour to 35 minutes or worse on a bad day, but pretty good. Proposed precinct provisions are designed to coordinate development with transport infrastructure. Development is restricted until identified transport upgrades are implemented, including roading improvements and increased ferry capacity. And they're sort of woven into the precinct provisions in that way. Celia? Part of the package of information forwarded to us was around the green infrastructural, revegetation and improvements on the site, and getting some benefits in that regard across some of the former golf course land and the land outside of the former golf course to the south. Celia? Water and wastewater I've talked about already, but just, by way of bullet points, water supply is proposed to be provided by groundwater bores, including the existing bores provided to Formosa, and resource consents are indeed required for the new bores and to vary existing permits, and the applicant proposes to seek those during the plan change process. Wastewater, existing Beachlands is served by the local treatment plant, which has no capacity to serve the proposal. Beachlands treatment options are identified, including private on-site treatment facility, and consents would be required for wastewater servicing as well. Watercare do raise concerns about the certainty of wastewater solutions. Next one. Now, this is a variation of the slide which I showed before in terms of the plan change process, but we're a little bit further back in the chain, and we see the Clause 25 decision on the left-hand side at the bottom. So having gone through it being lodged, requested further information, responses, much consideration given by Chloe and others, technical specialists advising Chloe in terms of the information requested, we've now reached this juncture of the process, the Clause 25 determination. In terms of the recommendations within the report, the recommendations are that the Planning, Environment and Parks Committee not reject the private plan change under Clause 25.4, on the basis that the grounds to reject the private plan change request under 25.4 are limited and having regard to the relevant case law. In terms of the tests identified, the request isn't frivolous. These are terms in the legislation. The applicant has provided supporting technical information and the private plan change has a resource management purpose. The request is not vexatious and the applicant is not acting in bad faith by lodging a private plan change request. There's history behind those provisions, how they got there, I guess. The substance of the request has not been considered within the last 2 years. Due to the lack of funding available for transport infrastructure required to support the development of beachlands, a coarse grain assessment of the request indicates that this aspect of the private plan change may not be in accordance with sound resource management practice. However, as more detailed information relating to the impact of the development on the transport network, both positive and negative, and the cost of transport upgrades needed becomes available, there does remain the prospect that a funding solution can be found. While the council could reject the private plan change request for processing under this ground, the recommendation is that it is reasonable for the council to exercise its discretion to not reject the private plan change under this ground. So a coarse grain assessment does not indicate that the private plan change, if accepted for processing, will make the Auckland plan contrary to Part 5 of the Resource Management Act, and provisions of the unitary plan subject to the private plan change requests have been operative for at least the past 2 years. So the recommendation to accept the private plan change request by Beachland South Partnership Limited for the 307 hectares, which are the subject site, pursuant to clause 25.2b of Schedule 1 for the following reasons. Accepting the private plan change request for notification will enable a range of matters, including infrastructure funding, to be considered on their merits during a public participatory process, with submissions and much consideration through that process as per normal, if you look at that flowchart. It is not inappropriate to adopt the private plan change. The private plan change proposal is not identified as a location for future growth in the Auckland plan, future land supply strategy, and there is currently no provision for funding for the full costs of water and wastewater infrastructure required, or the necessary transport upgrades, including the widening of the Whitford-Maraetai Road, for which there's a designation been in place for a while. It's not appropriate to deal with the private plan change requests as if it was a resource consent application, as the request seeks to rezone a substantial area of land for development over a period of time, rather than undertake a single development project. So I think that's it from me in terms of description. I'm happy, well, Chloe may want to come in with some additional stuff, Mr. Chair, additional information.
Sure, thank you. Did Chloe come back on from the technical difficulties she was having? I don't see her back, so we'll just assume she couldn't.
What's on us then?
Cool. Questions we have first, Councillor Williamson. And then Councillor
Mr. Chairman, I'm probably going to need your assistance in terms of what progresses here. I heard you earlier say we can't debate this stuff now because it's been done before. Given I'm a brand new councillor and I would really like to just have a little bit of a say in this. This particular development, I would be...
Could I confirm? This one you can absolutely debate. This is not. This is pre plan change hearing. So
okay.
This is
okay.
questions and debate.
Okay.
But it is quite a narrow debate. It's around whether we should accept, adopt, or reject.
Okay.
And then we also have narrow reasons we can do that. But you can absolutely ask questions on whatever.
So all I wanted to say, and I'll try and do it very briefly so I don't bore everybody, is if this was being done in isolation somewhere away from everybody, have 100% tick through. I believe in development like this. The concern I've got as a member for the Howick ward is that this Beachlands Maraetai is feeding so many more people into our area for schools, for our roads, for our medical care at the A&E centres and so on. With these levels of population growth, without the corresponding schools and their own medical service, the pressure that'll come on Pakuranga Highway and a whole lot of other roads that feed from there to the city. My intention is to vote against this simply because I think it needs to be reconsidered in the impact of it has on a flow-through zone, which is the only way you can get to Auckland is to come through us. And our roads can't cope with what we've got. Our schools can't cope. Principals are saying we're getting a huge number of kids coming from out there already by way of vans and buses and all sorts of, that's just only going to grow. And so the reason I will vote against it is not because I'm opposed to the concept of it, but I'm very concerned about the impact through us and would like more consideration for that to be given.
Yeah, Councillor Williamson, I might get Megan to, so, because I agree with you, but we have in the past, and this is not because you're new or anything, we've done it ourselves previously, have rejected something when we haven't actually had the legal ability. So, so Megan might go through how we could still oppose it even if we're accepting it. It's a bit confusing, but Megan will try and get through that.
No pressure, Mr. Chair. As the Chair said, there are three decisions or three options for you today. It is to accept the private plan change, to go through the process. So it's not about whether or not you like it or that you agree with everything. It's just about accepting it in the first gateway to go through into a hearing and submission process. The second option is to adopt it as your own. So that means it becomes, instead of being sitting out there as a private applicant, it becomes a council plan change. So you have taken it on yourself and you continue it through the process. The third option you have is to reject it. So for various reasons, and we can talk those through if that's where it goes, you would decline the ability to start the process. So those are your three options: to accept it through, to start the process, to adopt it as your own, or to reject it and not allow it. So I think maybe once there's some other questions, if the committee is of a mind to reject or not accept, then maybe we can discuss what that might look like in terms of your reasons for doing so.
Can I then ask you, if we went with option one is to start the process, are we going to be given an assurance that that process will take account of externalities like impact on other communities and collateral damage to infrastructure elsewhere? Because a whole lot of that report was all about what this thing will do and the streets around it and the neighbourhood. I'd be happy for a process to begin that identified the lack of all of the things I just listed, and that they need to be in, and I would think the developers should be paying a huge chunk of money towards roading infrastructure that's got to go in and so on. But if just voting for the process to start, but those will all be taken account of, I'm okay with that.
Okay, Councillor Williamson, absolutely. So at the moment, there's no mover and seconder. I've had an indication from Councillor Baker and Councillor Filipaina to move in second, but I have added, and this might help you make your decision or not, I've added, and I think Andy and Alf are fine with that. So this is essentially an add-on, much like we did with Drury. We sort of didn't have the reasons to stop the process, but we are signalling that we will submit against with these caveats. So seeking to have the private plan change declined unless council's concerns around transport infrastructure funding, financing, delivery, climate change and impacts, and any other relevant matter. We could widen the scope of that.
We just widen that to impacts on neighbouring wards?
And what would be the...
Can we, sorry, through the chair, I've made a note of that. Maybe as the discussions continue, maybe that becomes clear about what those words might be, and we can maybe come back to that. But just to say, this is what we did with Drury, so it allows the process to begin. But if this committee has got concerns about it, then it allows us to make a submission, and we are considered a submitter at the same time. You still have that opportunity, though, to reject it outright. So again, there might be some further questions and discussion around that.
So yeah, in the past when we have rejected, it essentially goes to court anyway and starts the process itself without our sort of, that in the past that has happened. Member Hirare.
I personally am absolutely in favour of it, favour of the plan change. Here's why.
Councillor Hirare, Member Hirare, if we just stick...
Morris had some call to read and ask a question. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll try and keep it to... I guess he was trying to understand what his vote would mean, and so... if you could focus your comment to a question is, I mean, you can give a preamble to the question, but I think we can debate it, or I guess just go. Sorry, member.
You want me to wait?
You have, maybe it's a clarifying comment then, if you're wanting to give your, is that correct at the end? That might be the question.
No, not really. I just think you're all wrong. And I'm about to say why I think you're wrong, but I can wait if you want me to.
It may be helpful for the discussion starting off. This is the first time we've done this this
Okay.
term, so if you want to help, yep.
Well, but basically, I'm actually gobsmacked that I live in a community where there are literally hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of apartments going up. I've got 16 across the road from me. No new infrastructure, more kids at school, more people in the chemist, in the medical centre, just like what Morris says. But these are all working class kids. These are all working class families that actually are trying to look for a home and a place to live. But when we ask that, we see a plan out east. We get, oh no, we can't afford the infrastructure. We can't afford this. Can't afford that. School's not big enough. We haven't got enough schools. We haven't got enough schools in Te Ratu. We haven't got enough resources in Te Ratu. But there are literally hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of new homes that have gone up in my area, the suburb that I live, and I haven't got any say about it. There was no plan change. And here's the other thing. This development, for the first time that I've seen, has actually got a Māori development partner, a local iwi, as part of the ball game. And we're about to say, and we want to say no.
No, it was just me.
Oh, don't worry. Yeah, okay, it's just you. But we're about to even have a discussion about those sorts of things. So I think that even the change that I see up there is yeah, it just seems to me that we jump in the gun a bit here. If you want to say no, that's cool. But these guys, these people will go to court and we will lose.
Thank
Go for
you,
it.
member.
Spend
So-
your money.
so-
In a time where the mayor has said, we want to save money, we're about to spend money to say no to a development that actually brings in people and brings in more money, more rates money for Auckland. Go for it.
Thank you, member Henare. I guess what my additional chair's rec there is accepting it. It's a moving it on, but with a caveat that because, and I guess unlike Te Atatu, there was a process, the unitary plan that did go through, and that was the ability to people to have the say then, 2013, 14, 15, 16, which then allowed for that intensification.
You're talking to a former politician, so don't.
No. I guess I'm clarifying this area was never, this area, and I guess the issue is this area was not ever predicted for development. And so I guess, this is my opinion, the issues across the city in like Te Atatu Peninsula is the lack of infrastructure, and what we're trying to do is not make that exacerbate that.
It's okay for us, but not for them.
No, that's not what I was saying.
Exactly what you just said. Because that's exactly what people in Te Ratu are faced with.
Yep.
Schools, no more resources.
Cool.
Bugger
Well,
infrastructure, more
Yeah,
infrastructure.
member Henare, I guess I don't know how to. Okay, Tau, we'll just go to the other 4 questions and then maybe try and come back to, and then you'll get to debate again at the point in time. Councillor Ferry.
Thanks. I just have a very quick question around local board views. I note in the report they're not required, and I acknowledge that. The fact that Andy's moving it suggests that the local board's probably okay with it, but I did just want to get a sense of that, noting they've had a presentation on it. Do we have any sense of their views on whether we should put this through to the process? Thank you.
I mean, I'm sure they've had a presentation from Beachland South in terms of a representation or delegation to the local board, but at this stage of the game, typically local board involvement is pretty limited. We would be seeking their views. Were it to go forward, we would be seeking their views as part of the normal process after the submissions are received. So typically, well, I go to local boards a lot to talk about things. So what happens is submissions come in, there's a report written that says there were X in favour and Y against. Here are the key issues. Please provide your views, and they'll be considered by the Section 42, the planners report within that process as part of their recommendations, which then go to the commissioners who make the decision. So that's typically when the local board perspective is really brought to bear in the process. So later on down the track in terms of that flow chart.
Sorry, I do understand that because I have been on a local board.
Yes, yes, indeed.
What I was really asking for is whether they have given an informal indication. Okay, Andy's nodding, so that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferry. Councillor Newman. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. One of my questions was about the local boards, why they weren't sought for options to reject or accept, and that's not just the Franklin local board. I think that the Howick local board would have to be as well. Knowing that area very well, out there, I think it's a little bit different to Te Atatu, and I've got family that live in Te Atatu, as Tao knows. Okay, so I'm for everybody now. But the concern is out in Pine Harbour beachlands, there's no connection to wastewater or water. Most of the water is bore water, or they rely on tank water. And being the chair of Civil Defence, I'm really concerned about water hydrants and fires and that sort of thing. Transport, that's another biggie. Schools, there's no schools out there. We've got literally thousands of college students that are having to bus into Howick, St Kitts, wherever they can get into to school. So that's another concern. I'd be all for this development if I thought that this development could push us over the line and we could actually get some schools and some other infrastructure out there. If you know that road, the Woodford Road into Howick.
Maybe if we just try and keep it into questions.
Well, I'm saying if, that's a question, if you knew the road out there, it's very, very narrow. It's a problem. So,
if you'd like to, so I'm happy for you to debate this at debate. But was there a question around what would happen around this infrastructure? Is that where you are?
Well, that's one of the questions, and I was just saying that I could possibly support it if I knew, and if maybe it could be answered if I knew there was going to be a real push to make sure there's a school out there. There's literally thousands of children out there, no schools, not one, no colleges, no intermediates. I think there could be a couple of play schools. There is a primary school, but that is it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Vanessa, are you coming to the table for? No? No. Celia?
Through the chair, I think Craig can answer that question for you.
Yes, I can, in as much as, the plan change isn't to include a school necessarily, but the plan change is purporting to enable the provision of a school on site. There has been interest in investigations by the Ministry of Education, as they do, around the region, and I did see Beachlands on the map for investigation for a secondary school, and it happened to be in this location. I think part of the applicant's case is that with the population growth that would come with it, you'd be suddenly above thresholds necessary to achieve a local secondary school and thus save a lot of the traffic going eastwards into Howick and St Kitts and all the other places on a daily basis, and then the tide goes back the other way just after 3:30 or 3 o'clock, depending. So that's as much as I know in terms of interest from the ministry about a secondary school on that site. And I rather suspect the applicants would be advancing that investigation as much as they can in terms of liaison with the ministry. But we're at that stage of the process where were it to go on, there'd be further investigations of finer grain detail, not just the course level, which we're limited to at this stage. But that's what I've heard.
So just one further question, just with NZTA and with the roading. You know, one of the other concerns, maybe you've got an answer. What would happen if we get further development out there? We're going to have potentially 3,000 there. Then we've got Formosa that's also wanting to develop, so that could be an extra another 10,000. We could have 30,000 people living out there, and we have a country road, a very narrow bridge where there's a lot of accidents that happen. So I do know that area, and you know, and I'd like it to develop out there, but the roading and the infrastructure, it's just not going to cope. Already, every morning, there's gridlock. Just about every second day, there's a serious accident out there. The emergency services can't get out there. And when we've had flooding and stormwater...
Councillor, just back to a question, because you can have a debate at debate. We're not at that time yet.
Do you know if NZTA is going to do anything?
I don't know if it's necessarily NZTA would get involved in this one. I think it's primarily the domain of Auckland Transport, and certainly through the process so far, there's been pretty clear signals, information coming from Auckland Transport as to the general concern at existing levels of problems. I've been out there a number of times recently myself, and it's certainly mixed. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's terrible. And they're saying existing problem, there's existing designations in place for improvements. It's just there's no funding in place for that. The applicants themselves, I think on page, certainly into the report, I won't bore you, page 9, have referenced a funding contribution, which they're, page 9, looking to make. And part of that's to address intersection improvements and also a contribution to the ferry service. Chloe, the report author, is communicating. Sorry, Mr. Chair, it just makes it a bit difficult. Applicant's assessment indicates the road does not require 4-laning until the future urban zone is developed. But that is something Chloe advises will need to be worked through the plan change process. But yeah, sort of back to where I was, there is a funding plan has been offered thus far. And in terms of the partners for the plan change applicants, you know, you've got some fairly significant partners in that regard. There's a long way to go in transport issues, there's no doubt about it, and funding and dealing with problems would be part of it. Were it to go forward, were that to be part of your decision?
Through the chair, if I can just add, the transport infrastructure is a significant issue here, and so you're right to raise it. The applicant has provided some advice around certain levels of development and improvement to the transport network, and they will contribute to some of that. Auckland Transport also believes there is more that needs to be done. That is a matter, I guess, of when you move through the process to do that detail later on. But let's be really clear, it is an issue, and that's why I think the chair has put this amendment up, or sorry, in addition, in terms of submitting on it, because it is something that this council should be concerned about.
Member Ashby.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question regarding the Māori impact statement, and on paragraph 138, you note that Ngāi is a development partner. So the question is, how has council reflected the RPS, I think it's B6 requirement, to give effect to supporting Māori economic wellbeing and development of land? If that's clearly an element at play here, just interested in your comments, if that's a live element. how it's been reflected in the, or if it's been reflected in the thinking. And the second question is just so that if I could have your assistance in this. The resolutions, as I understand them, are simply about accepting the plan change proposal, which will then run through its own open process where the public and the council can debate the merits of it. So I'm just would appreciate that clarification. I think it's quite clear, but I'm just wondering if everyone around the table understands that. Kia ora.
Craig, if maybe you could answer the first question, and then on the Māori impact statement. Microphone.
In terms of liaison that's gone on underway, already by the applicant, it seems to us there's been a fairly strong effort made to contact all of the Māori whenua, and ultimately Ngāi ki Tamaki has moved forward with the applicant, inclusive of a equity stake in the development as well, as I understand it. And in terms of Ngāi providing a cultural values assessment in relation to the plan change, they have. In terms of the recommendation to accept, I don't know if there's any explicit, and I'm speaking for someone else, bear in mind, so my memories, there was a lot of swatting went on just before the meeting. Explicit reference to the RPS provisions relating to cultural development or development of, as you discussed, that have come through in Chloe's report. But I think we're also under pressure, Chloe particularly, to keep the report as brief as possible. And it has already grown to 27 pages. But I think the recommendation, being what it is, might provide an indication in that regard.
Thank you. Next question, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't wish to enter into the debate at this point. I have a question specifically of you, although I put it in the context of the fact that I favour this because I think it may bring daylight onto a number of issues that we really want to see as an exemplar going forward in terms of infrastructure. So can you scroll up, please, so I can just see the additional wording that you had there? Mr. Chair, I'm a little bit worried that while I understand your intention here, it sounds a little, firstly, could infrastructure and funding be better wording? Because what I'm hearing by way of concerns from colleagues is not just around transport infrastructure, around other infrastructure. So if you were to make it more general in terms of infrastructure and funding, that might address it. And I also have a little difficulty in being quite as bold on one to say that the plan change be declined, because that shows perhaps a bit of predetermination that may suggest, there may be other factors. So I wondered whether you would seek to modify those words, particularly around infrastructure and funding, because then that also takes into account the issues that are the responsibility of central government as well. And, I'd like to see this proceed today, but in a way that gives everyone a measure of comfort and addresses those concerns that we have been unable to do in other areas, as I've expressed earlier today on qualifying matters. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. And I guess it is slightly complex now because I've given over the full resolution, including the addition to Councillor Baker and Philippina. I guess the intention with this is to accept it, not reject it. So it goes to the through the process. But D is similar to what we did on Drury, because there was a lot of opposition to we should reject Drury, but there wasn't grounds to do that. So I don't believe, and we don't believe there was enough grounds to reject. But because this is rural land, never ever expected in the next 30 years to have any development, the issue is that we have to be clear about what officers will be preparing as submitters to and that is around the fact there is no infrastructure, the fact it's a climate concern and all that. So I guess,
So may I, through you, ask the mover and the seconder whether they would entertain infrastructure and funding rather than the way in which it's expressed at the moment?
I certainly would. I mean, I was a little nervous in D1 in terms of just how staunch it was, and but I understand the issues that we have, and you know what, this is obviously a starting point for, you know, a negotiation potentially in terms of how do we get this and get the right result, and so, you know, I'm going to speak to it into debate, but you know, I'd be happy with a broadening out of that, in terms of you know, adding, you know, a wider description of, you know, removing the transport and just having infrastructure, because a lot of it is contained within, you know, it's referenced in the report as to what, you know, the applicant is proposing to do. You know, and this puts a little bit of a heat on them, I suppose, to say, well, you've proposed it, that's how strong you are. And, you know, and I'd like to think they're as good for their word. And so it's, you know, and it's, then the declining is maybe it's a different wording there in regards to that, you know, that our submission is one that strongly, you know, or requires or you know, I don't know. It's a wordsmithing so we get the right result.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder whether it could
Yeah.
be something that we could have a little bit of time on to get the wording right, because this could become a really interesting precedent for others that might come our way.
yes. The wording here, I did ask for staff advice during, and maybe I'll get Megan to maybe talk about the process from here if this was the wording, and then if we need to change it.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So if you did choose to include this new D, you need to provide advice or direction to us about the nature of the submission you want to make. And again, with a submission, effectively there are three options. You either you agree with it, you agree with the proposal, you agree with it with amendments or with modifications, or you oppose it or decline in this case. So we probably need one of those three words to help direct us as to the kind of things you want us to talk about. And of those three, while it does sound harsh, the decline at least indicates the concerns. It may not be full opposition, it may be in some areas, but it also may just be concerns about these elements, which we've listed and that we'll keep working through to make sure the words are right. And then you'll see in 2 that if, in fact, as we get through mediation, as the hearings go through, and if it is going to be approved, then we would take the view that we would like to continue to work to look at the kinds of conditions and modifications which might meet our needs as well. So it's really all about providing direction to the staff about the kinds of things you want us to talk about in the submission. You're right, decline sounds harsh, but it's kind of the three options, is the one that fits the most.
So maybe we'll just do a 2-minute to discuss it, if that's okay with staff. But I guess the issue is, and I understand where Toe came from, you know, we're not stopping the process, we're continuing the process. But the issue is much like Drury, we gained a lot of things through appeals, because we had a motion like this. Obviously the development went ahead, but then we got extra infrastructure and extra things part of that. So the issue is, if we're not strong enough, then
Chair, just clarification around it while it's still getting wordsmith. Around transport, the removal of the word transport and leaving it with infrastructure, because the infrastructure word covers what's been put into the report. So as Councillor Baker suggested around the transport by putting it as infrastructure covers everything. And that's my only comment in regards to a compromise. Because it's got in there the infrastructure, as Councillor Fletcher said, it also around the water concerns and the bore, everything else. If we end up leaving it at that just gives us that open sort of, yeah, that's just my whakaaro.
Did you want an adjournment for a minute or two to discuss this, or do we feel like we've got the words?
I'm okay with that, just what the rest of the, or maybe there's some more questions we can still keep.
Cool. Okay, so we'll go to Councillor Turner. Thank you. Councillor Bartley.
Oh, I just wanted to know that when we've had past developments in Beachlands, was the same, do we look at the same kind of response as what we're having now, or is it a matter of this being a bigger scale? Same response?
During the Manukau times. So it was a rural settlement, a coastal settlement that grew through their district plan provisions many years ago. So yeah, there wasn't a private plan change to develop it. It would have been a development that came through with other consents for that area, but it must have been zoned under the Manukau plan for development.
That's correct.
So this plan change, I think, more than doubles the population of Beachlands. This is quite different to any consent or.
So this plan change is going to be changing rural land into urban land and picking up the Formosa Golf Club, which is part of it, as part of the development land.
Right. No more questions? Yeah, I'll just go to Councillor Watson then. Toe.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if it's been covered or not. As I understand it, Beachlands, and it may well be in the report, was the only location in Auckland where Auckland Transport identified transport constraints as a qualifying matter in this Plan Change 78 process. So that's the only place in the whole of Auckland. So my question there is, in light of that rather unique and damning indictment of the inadequacies, I understand how constrained we are in terms to reject it at the first post. And I agree with the D. Is that fact that was the only qualifying matter that was established, is that grounds for conceivably even rejecting it right at the start? That's my only question, given that in the whole of Auckland the transport was so lacking that and we only just did that a few months ago, so it's not historic. So could I have an answer to that, please?
Yeah, so as far as I understand, the qualifying matter for transport in Beachlands was so clear that we haven't even increased the MDRS there, or our plan there is to not allow any growth, and that was before this came. So it is quite a stark difference if we accepted before. If maybe I could have a comment from Megan on that to clarify.
Through the chair, look, a reminder here, this is all rural zone land, so none of this was planned possibly ever to be developed, but certainly not in, for council's perspective, for at least 30 years. So it's a significantly different kind of development that we would be expecting. There are some constraints on us in terms of this particular process that the RMA sets out and this particular first gateway of setting the process. There are grounds to reject it if that's what you wish to do, in our view, but there are legal risks that come with that, and so overall the recommendation is to accept it, and the chair has said, also added that we should therefore do a submission to deal with some of these issues. So you're right, Councillor Watson, the fact that we've put a qualifying matter already, which is still subject to hearing, so of course that may fail, it may not, it may be entirely appropriate as well. These things have come kind of at the same time, so we're a little unclear yet about whether that qualifying matter is justified under that particular part of the Act. But it clearly shows that we already think there are transport issues, and therefore, if this does proceed through the process, we need to be really clear and work with the applicant as a regulatory authority and as a submitter as well to work out what the implications are. And the applicant has accepted that in the sense that they know that there needs to be some transport upgrades. They are proposing to contribute to some of those. Auckland Transport believes there's even more that needs to be done, and that's a matter of merit that if this proceeds through will be dealt with in the hearing. So it's a real issue that you've raised.
Sorry, can I just add something? So there's also a qualifying matter in relation to water and wastewater in the Beachlands area, the existing Beachlands area. So it's already, so there's like a double qualifying matter there. And that's why we don't want to see further development happening in the existing settlement.
Thank you. Tau.
Kia ora. On 32 and 33, but more importantly, point 33, it says that a draft funding plan that identifies $75 million contribution by the applicant to transport infrastructure upgrades, including several intersections, and $16 million contribution to ferry services. Is that true, or, there's a statement there that says that the developers will pay for $75 million and upwards of $80 or $81 million of infrastructure work. Is it? Take that with face value, or?
Well, happy to answer through you, Mr. Chair. That's been presented as part of the package of information. Crown Infrastructure Partners, as well as that was initially a letter from Crown Infrastructure Partners discussing their participation in that, and then later on, upon prodding, show us your detail, further information was provided, which 75 million breakdown to Woodford, Maraetai Road, Jack Lachlan intersections, etc., which is on page 9 of the version I've got.
Thank you, Tau. Right, I think we have all the questions done. Any more? Forever hold your peace. Cool, so we'll move to comment. Oh, Count.
If I may, just picking up on what Tau had to say, if you go to number 8, under transport, it says transport upgrades proposed may improve, where is it? However, the applicant is not proposing any contribution for widening Woodford Road and the 4 lanes or the Woodford bypass, which are both designated but not currently funded. And that's the real bottleneck, and that's the real bottleneck.
Thank you. Right, we'll ask the officers to move from the table. We have a motion on the table, moved by Councillor Baker, seconded by Councillor Filipaina. Did you want to lead, Andy, or finish, or both?
I get the chance to do both, don't I? So look, obviously I've represented this area for 12 years, and so I know it better than anyone in this room. And there are issues. Beachlands has doubled in size since 2010 because of planning decisions of the past. You cannot deny that, and that is the fact. It was left out of future urban zoning during the unitary plan work. There's a future urban zone randomly in Maraetai, just a few kilometres to the east. There are existing, as has been identified, there are existing infrastructure issues, including water and transport. They are existing issues. If this plan change goes through, it is the opportunity to fix those issues because it creates scale and it creates the opportunity that includes education. The local board that I was previously chair of was donkey deep in discussions with the Ministry of Education to try and get them to commit to a secondary school to complement the 2 primary schools that currently exist in that area. 9 buses leave Beachlands currently every day to take students not only to Howard College but to Sancta Maria, to schools all over South Auckland, because that is where they go and they have to go. And so whilst I had some nerves in regards to the wording of the new chair's rec, I understand why we are doing that, because it brings people to the table. We must, in my view, the appropriate course of action here is to accept this, is to get the discussion started, is letting the commissioners decide what is appropriate and move on. And Howick is not the final destination of everyone that lives in Beachlands.
What?
They go over, I know, hard to believe. They do go over Sandstone Road into Flatbush and off. They do go along Whitford and through Whitford and out through Brookby and into Manarewa and other places. And so, yes, it's important, but we just need to move on and accept this and get on with it and let the process start.
Kia ora, we do need a little less over talk. I'm happy for both of you to have your speaking turn if that's okay. Next up we have Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. Yeah, Chair, look, I like the wording as written, and honestly, I think it's time that we get some guts as a council. We stand up and we say, look, there are parts of the city where we should no longer be building all the way out with respect to this area, in the middle of nowhere, then expecting people to drive to work. That is terrible in so many ways, and it's the old way that we've always done in this city, just building out these huge suburbs miles out, and then everybody drives to work and drives to school, etc., etc. What we haven't mentioned in this debate is climate. This is a horrible, horrible development for climate change and emissions reduction. I think we need to be really strong about this and say no way to this. And I'm really glad that the wording of this is not it reflects that. Sorry, I'm struggling to be clear. I'm still a bit sick, but Member Henare, I just want to say you're 100% correct, and I feel the same anger that you do. Being a Te Atatū South resident, I know exactly what you're talking about, and this is the experience of a lot of suburban Auckland, actually, not just West Auckland. But look, I'll just finish up by saying, look, if I may say, colleagues, I've been banging my head against the wall for a long time now about this. When you don't zone centrally located areas for housing, areas that are close to jobs, close to study, close to public transport, this is exactly what happens right in front of you. Housing has to go somewhere. So when we artificially hold our housing supply down in these wealthy communities in the central suburbs, this is what happens. This is the alternative in front of you. People that have concerns about this development, frankly, should probably sit down and reflect upon those concerns, because this is exactly where our planning regime has been leading for decades and decades, continues to lead, because we've done nothing about it. So I'm pretty mad about this, and I think we should get rid of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Newman.
Well, he's wrong, because a developer wants to make some money, which is why the application's going in.
Councillor Newman,
that's not called for, Chair.
Yeah, we're all allowed to have our views and maybe talk to the motion, not the people.
I don't interrupt you.
Chair, I just wanted to thank you for the way in which you're trying to navigate this. I think that the debate's been quite interesting, and I also want to acknowledge Megan and the officers for the work that they're trying to do in relation to this. Look, Councillor Williamson, this really shouldn't be. This has to be approved for consideration, not adopted. It has to be approved for consideration, because that's the way in which the matters that you've legitimately raised are going to be canvassed. But Chair, you are absolutely right that the matters that do need to be canvassed relate to how one mitigates effects. And it is primarily infrastructure related, but it does go a little bit beyond infrastructure. The receiving environment in relation to the water catchment there is not good. Also, too, the advice that's been received in relation to, well, the whole of the area would have to be built out before that would trigger the requirement for the 4-lane highway. I kind of feel that would be miles too late.
And to be perfectly honest, this will just trigger even more demand for what will be the Mill Road corridor, because it will all just channel down through Botany and up through Redoubt and out the back of Tuckerton and beyond. Look, Chair, I think, frankly, for his sins, Councillor Williamson should be part of this too. He should be participating in what are the mitigations that would be required for the plan change, and if you thought that was a wise thing to do, I think he should be encouraged to be part of that as well. But in any event, I'm happy to support the recommendations, but Councillor Williamson is new and he should be required to participate in providing some very vigorous planning evidence to support whatever the council's submission will be.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Darby.
Yeah, well, look, thank you, Councillor Henderson, for your comments. I was thinking the same. Maybe not as much energy, Councillor Henderson, but I did appreciate your comments. Yeah, how do you put this? We have to, by the look of it, we've looked at the, our legal advice in the past, and we don't have anything in front of us that presents us with the opportunity to reject this. But in my eyes, should be rejected because it's just super sprawl by the New Zealand Super Fund. And this is a public entity looking to financially plan our futures, our retirements, and it's using, it's living in the past really, tackling this one. It's got an enormous climate footprint, this, and in my eyes it's just yesteryear, yestercentury development concept for how a city should unfold. Kainga Ora passed this up after advocacy. They had advice that they should be picking this Formosa course up when it was on the market a few years ago. Wisely, they rejected it because they did not see it as a place for future Aucklanders to be living, or the Aucklanders they're responsible for at least. So, yeah, this is just poorly considered New Zealand Super Fund, super sprawl outcome. And it's really disappointing, and I think we do need to follow through really hard on ensuring that they can cough up every dollar to provide the infrastructure to make that work. But it'll still be remote, it'll still be at the other side of Auckland, and it'll still channel through the Howick ward, whichever way, because you can't ferry people out of there. You're going to have an incredible bus network that's running and funneling right through the Howick ward. Yep, we will have the Eastern Busway up and running. That'll be a good thing, but it'll never be running out there. There might be some priority lanes. That'll be good, but this is just disappointing to see the New Zealand Super Fund along with Russell Group take this one on when no one else wanted it. They have sold a golf course though and bought a golf course.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner.
Just three questions, just for my own lead, if I could. Councillor Henderson, I presume...
Councillor, sorry, we can't ask questions now. We're in debate, and we can't ask questions of each other during this process either. So you could pose your questions maybe as comments, but please try and keep it to the issues, not other councillors.
All right, I was just trying to take a lead. I presume that from Councillor Darby's comments that Councillor Henderson and him are in agreement, but I just wonder how that fixes the problems like Te Ata 2, which are people-bound. And then I wondered, I was going to ask the question before, I don't know the process well enough to realise where I can come in and I can't. Maybe I can just push in like Poe does. I wanted to know if the Maori entity in this project was just a commercial one, or I was hoping, do they have teeth that can bring change? How do we say yes to this with some sort of confidence that we can put the horse before the cart? And the infrastructure problem coming last is a huge problem right across the city.
I'll just take people's leads by seeing how they vote, I suppose, seeing I can't ask questions.
But thank you, Councillor. Councillor Walker. Councillor Running, please.
Just need a little bit of water to assist my mental functioning. I just have a concern that could be rectified by way of addition, and that is that the issue is not simply around infrastructure funding, finance and delivery. It's also about the provision of infrastructure itself and the ability of infrastructure to even cope. And I'm referring to water, wastewater, roading, public transport, not simply in the immediate vicinity, but elsewhere. And there is no way that any funding will actually address those issues, particularly given the fact that our development contributions are woefully inadequate. So I'm interested in the addition of infrastructure generally. So infrastructure funding, finance and delivery, but infrastructure itself is fundamental because that goes to the sustainability of this whole matter.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Chair Dalton, Angela Dalton.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I was just going to speak in support of accepting this to go through the process, but we need to make sure that that submission is quite strong around the relevant points. But look, it's got every right to go through the process, and to reject is going to land us in court. That's going to be expensive. There's no guarantees that we would win. In fact, it's probably unlikely that we would win. And so there goes a whole lot of time and resource as well as cost to our council and to, importantly, the ratepayers of Auckland. So this is, I hear what Councillor Henderson is saying. He's absolutely been consistent right the way through. And I understand where he's coming from. But I think this partnership just needs to be called on the strength that it has to deliver some of these things that we're asking for, especially through Crown infrastructure partners. Partnership with iwi is magical. And so let's just get it through the process and put in our submission with all of our concerns that we have, which keeps us in consistency with what we've done with Drury and other plan changes as well. So I'll be supporting the recommendations. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Deputy Chair. Are there any other speakers?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I was seeking a change.
Okay, so
I'm suggesting that the matter is not simply infrastructure funding, financing and delivery. It's also infrastructure itself.
Okay, so it's probably out of order that I'm letting you speak again. We did have the discussion of the changes back then, but I will say we will be ensuring that that is covered under any other relevant matters, which is a bit of a catch-all to help that your position has been heard clear. Would you like a speaking turn, Councillor Philippine?
And it'll be 30 seconds, Chair. Look, I just want to acknowledge, and Councillor Baker's timing me, but just want to acknowledge your recommendations that we both accepted. Also to the staff in regards to where we are. The most relevant thing for me in regards to this is in the recommendations that was under A, number 1, the grounds to reject a private plan change request under clause 25(4) of Schedule 1 unlimited and having regard to relevant case law. That's exactly it. That's why I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. And if there are no other speakers, I'll speak and then give Councillor Baker if he chooses to. So just briefly for me, when I saw this, my instinct was clearly to reject, much like Drury and others, that it goes against the Auckland Unitary Plan, the Auckland Plan, even the Government and Nationals Plan for the MPS, MDRS. It goes against everything that we are doing for climate change, because it does force 10,000 people to be living without the infrastructure and the access to all the things that many of us are trying to get our communities, but we don't have the funding for, as other members around this table have just spoken about. Their communities are already lacking that infrastructure because we continue to make the same mistakes. I then heard from the officers and from Councillor Baker and understood that is not a helpful way forward to reject. So, and I do not have the luxury as chair just to throw my vote against something without the proper consideration. So what I have tried, and thank you, and I'm glad that Councillor Baker and Councillor Filipaina have accepted the Chair Rex onto that, is around getting around the table, ensuring we are strong about the issues that we face as a city. We are billions behind in infrastructure, and if we continue to add more without having the ability to have that strong discussion with the applicant and the officers and everyone else around that table to get better outcomes to what looks like a fantastic, amazing development, and one of, it will be fantastic. But the issue is the impacts to everyone else, as Councillor Williamson has said, and to what we're forcing people to, they may get a house which is 100 grand cheaper, but their lifestyle, hours a day of driving, is not what we need to be doing. So, and I have not put a lens over who the developer is. We shouldn't be doing that under any decision. We have to look at this, that it is not ever been our plan to change this from rural land, but the process will help us get those positive outcomes and to try and address issues that other councillors have mentioned today. So just clarifying again what we're doing here, we will accept this if you vote for this. This is accepting the process. There will be a plan change. Everyone comes around the table then and goes through submission process. Public will have the say, and then what happens is we will then put a submission in through that process. We've signalled here on the types of things that will be in that submission, and then it's up to the independent commissioners to either mediate with everyone involved or put out a decision, much like other plan changes have in the past. So I hope that is okay. Thank you for the many questions and the debate around this table, and it's good to hear the passion as well, because the future of our city is important, and we should all be passionate about the ups and downs and our views on that. So, kia ora. And I will move to a vote. Councillor Baker, you don't want... Cool. All those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Was there anyone opposed? I didn't... I don't know if he said aye. Councillor Henderson, were you opposed or were you in favour, but I heard you late?
No, I'm in favour, thank you.
In favour. Thank you. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for that, and we will move now to